Hey, good morning. Rick Gibson, AARP Fraud Watch Volunteer, here with Seth Boffeli from the National Office. We are grateful to have you this morning, Seth. And I think we're going to talk about fraud in a really intelligent way today. Sometimes we're just kind of feeling our way, but now we have an expert with us. So we're going to really try to pick his brain and figure out what exactly is going on. Good morning, Seth.
Morning, Rick. Thanks for having me.
You bet. It's really nice to have you. And let's just start out by saying a lot of people really don't have a hold on how many frauds take place. They have a kind of a this will never happen to me attitude. Do you have any facts and figures on what level of fraud takes place in Kansas and Missouri or even nationally?
Yeah, that's a great question. My role with the Fraud Watch Network is I coordinate our outreach and education efforts in all 50 states. So, one of the great things and one of the terrible things about my job is I get to see scams from coast to coast and see what's trending and see how it impacts states. And we do kind of have some hot off the presses numbers from the Federal Trade Commission. So, every year, all reports of financial crimes, whether they're to the AARP Fraud Watch Helpline or the law enforcement, they all get fed into the Federal Trade Commission, something they call the Consumer Sentinel. So they have really a real time look throughout the year of what's happening in frauds and scams. And then at the end of the year, they compile a state by state report that shows you, what was the extent of fraud, what were the losses, and what are some of the trends. And it's really what we've seen really over the last 3 years um, since the start of COVID is just this historic spike in criminal behavior against consumers. And it really has been sort of the perfect storm for scammers. People are at home, they're uncertain, there's short supply, people are going online to buy things they never did before. All of these are just sort of like the perfect situation for scammers to jump in and take advantage. And what we really saw was a tripling nationally since 2019 in the
Mm.
total consumer dollars lost. So in 2019, according to the FTC, consumers lost $1.8 billion nationally. Last year, that number was $5.9 billion. $5.9 billion lost to criminal scammers. The vast majority of that is overseas. So think about that, Rick. $6 billion last year left our shores, left our country, and mostly went into international criminal enterprises. So the scope of this is just alarming. Not to mention the bad things that happen with our dollars once they're offshore. Zooming in a little bit, I looked at the Kansas and Missouri numbers, and we did see significant increases. Not exactly a tripling, but in Missouri, it went up over the 2 year or the 3 years about 150%. So in 2019 in Missouri, there's about $21 million in consumer losses. Last year, $52 million in consumer losses. $52 million out of the pockets of Missourians, their hard-earned dollars, sometimes their life savings, gone to these criminals. And in Kansas, it doubled. It went from $10 million in 2019 to about 20 million last year. So really scary trends. One thing I think this will kind of form our conversation today. One thing that really jumps off the page for the region is that the number one scam reported in Kansas and in Missouri are identity thefts. And when we zoom in even closer, this is really kind of red flag for Kansas, especially. The FTC did a report of the top metro markets nationwide um, in terms of the number of identity theft reports. And here's Kansas. Number two nationwide, Lawrence. Number three nationwide, Topeka. Number four nationwide, Wichita. Number 8 nationwide, Manhattan, and 15th nationwide is the Kansas City metro market. So both states included. So, if you guys want to zero in on one thing in Kansas City, I would strongly suggest identity theft, because it seems to be the con of choice for the criminals in that area.
Wow, that is amazing. I would never have dreamed, and I'm kind of in the business here, but I would never have dreamed that the numbers would be that high. Just so there's no misunderstanding, the national numbers that you gave us are in the billions with a B,
Correct.
and the state numbers are millions with an M.
Correct. And these
I,
and these metro markets are per capita, so I'm sure like there's probably more total reports coming out of, say, Miami than Wichita, but when you do it as a percentage of the population, that's where the numbers in Kansas really jump up.
well, then if you added to that the number of unreported frauds, because I think those are pretty large, we're talking about a lot of money here. So,
Yeah, we always say what we see reported is just the tip of the iceberg, because let's be honest, these criminals are very sophisticated. As I said before, they're international. They run like businesses, and they do this day in and day out as a profession. So they know all the tricks. They are psychological manipulators. And when somebody falls victim, they don't think about that. They don't think that they were just victimized by international criminal syndicate that used psychological tactics to manipulate them. They just feel like they were tricked, and they just feel ashamed, and they don't want to admit it. And so that's why so much of this stuff doesn't get reported. And the other reason is because the sad reality is we're probably not going to catch the criminals, and the money's probably not going to come back. So it adds that even more to that sense of helplessness, that even more that conclusion of what's the point.
yeah. Uh, you mentioned that the number one kind of fraud is identity theft. That's a little surprising too. Uh, what can we do to prevent identity theft specifically, or any fraud in general? What kinds of steps should we be taking to prevent rather than to try to get it back?
Yeah, it's a great question. There's sort of two ways that identity theft happens. The first I'll talk about a little bit later is you're it's a specific type of scam called an imposter scam, where you get a call or an email from someone claiming to be the IRS or your bank or Social Security, and essentially what they're after for your account numbers. And so that's one thing. The other thing, and probably the a lot of this tracks back to, is data breaches. I don't know about you. I think I've gotten free credit monitoring from about 3 different companies that lost my data. And so sometimes the question isn't like what to do when your identity is stolen. It's what to do because your identity might already be out there. Whether it's through a bank that got breached. I know there was a big Target breach a few years back. And so the best ways to protect yourself are things like, a lot of these scams come through the computer, so having a good antivirus software on your computer, making sure it's updated and turned on, that's one important thing. Doing regular credit checks. So there's 3 credit monitoring bureaus. You can get a free check, I think, every 6 months. So making sure you're getting those regularly, because a lot of times that's how you catch identity theft. You'll get that credit report, and there'll be an account on there that you didn't open, that you've never seen before. That's the first red flag. You can even go a step further by putting a credit freeze or a credit alert, which basically says that nobody, including yourself, unless you turn it off, can take out a new line of credit in your name for a year or maybe permanently. Credit monitoring is another thing. There's so many services out there that'll do that for you. And they're good. I know I bought a car last year, and as I was sitting in the dealership, like filling out my online application for the loan, and hit submit, and like 2 minutes later, I got an email from my credit monitoring service saying hey, somebody took out, a loan in your name at such and such dealership. And so it really is that, the good ones work that well. And then another thing to think about is two-factor authentication. And that's where to log into anything that has sensitive information, banking information, you have a password, but then you also have to get a lot of times where it works is you put in your password, then they text you a numeric code, and you put that's the second factor, you put that numeric code in, and then that way, if somebody gets a hold of your password, they can't get in your bank account unless they also have your phone to receive that text message for that second level of authentication.
Yeah, this two-factor authentication, which is reasonably new, is something that a lot of people object to as irritating or bothersome, or, oh, I hate having to put two in, but it could be a real lifesaver. I can think of circumstances where it can really change things around for you. Um, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure, but sometimes we need to know a cure for things. So if these preventative measures either don't happen or don't work, what do we do if our identity is stolen? What steps should we take then?
Yeah, I think if you know your identity's stolen, I think the first thing to do is to put a credit freeze on. And there's three bureaus, so you have to call all three of them. But you can tell them my identity's stolen. I want to put a freeze on my credit. That'll last for a year. And it's essentially called a credit alert. So you put an alert on your credit that freezes your credit for a year. You can put a permanent freeze on it. It takes longer, and then also you have to turn it off yourself if you say get a car or take out a home loan or something like that. And so you'll need to remember like the pin and the password and all that sort of stuff. And just getting back to what you said on the two-factor authentication, we are busy people. It just seems that even though that technology makes things easier, our lives never slow down. And so we all are kind of looking for that easy button, but that's where these scammers take advantage of us. And I'll just give you one example. Over the last 2 years, we've gotten used to taking out our phones and scanning those squiggly little QR codes to do everything from getting the menu to like going to a website. It's something that we never really did before, but it's really easy. It just pops up on you. You hold your phone up, the thing pops up, and you're good to go. Scammers are starting to create malicious ones of those QR codes, and putting them out in the world so that when you scan it, it actually takes you to a website that's theirs, instead of say your bank or someplace else like that. But it's just another example of the two-factor authentication. It takes a little bit longer. It's a couple extra steps, but it's there set up that way for your protection for you. And it's not just it's a little bit of an inconvenience, but it's there. It's an extra padlock. Think about it as an extra padlock on your bank.
Right. Well, all of that is very helpful. I would not have suspected that identity theft would be number one, but there are other things that take place too, right? I mean, there are things that happen besides taking your identity. What might some of those, especially most popular things, be?
Yeah. So also for both states, I think in both states, 20% of the complaints were for identity theft, but also 20% of the claims or the complaints were for imposter scams. So 40% in your region of people are either getting targeted with identity theft or imposter scams. And what do I mean by imposter scams? I think this is sort of a broad umbrella here, but everything from tax season's coming up, so people will start to get phone calls, text messages, emails saying like, this is the IRS, you haven't filed your taxes in 3 years, to avoid criminal penalty, click on this link or call that number back. So an imposter is anytime a scammer impersonates someone, for the purposes of either defrauding you or getting your information. So right now, tax season, government identity theft is a big thing. The summertime, for whatever reason, is really when we see a spike in Social Security. imposter scams. So you'll get same thing, comes on text, comes on phone, comes on email. Sometimes it's your benefits are being suspended to stop, on this date to stop that from happening. Call this number. Sometimes it's a message from someone posing as a police officer, saying that we hear this every year. There was a car rented in your name, found on the Mexican border, filled with drugs and bullet holes. If you do not contact us to clear this up, a warrant will be issued for your arrest. And again, the goal of the criminal here, one, is to impersonate someone of authority, someone we trust, so the IRS, Social Security, law enforcement, and then two, to create this sense of fear in their victim, so that they're not sort of processing all the steps. So you're like, oh my goodness, something really bad happened. Somebody got a hold of my credit card, rented a car, and it's in a crime, and now they're coming to get me. Like, I'm going to make this phone call. I can clear this all up because I'm in Kansas. I'm not in, New Mexico. So I'm just going to make a call and get this all cleared up. What they don't realize is that when they make that call, they're actually calling the criminal, who has a whole script laid out about how they're going to get them further into, we call it being in the ether. And it's really that emotional state where you don't quite, sort of panic that takes over, and you might see the red flags, but they don't register as red flags. You might think, okay, this seems a little bit suspicious, but this person has answered these other three questions correctly. So they seem like they know what they're talking about. So I'm just going to go ahead and give them my bank account number, or wire them, or give, the big thing these days that these scammers ask for is they ask their victims to go to the closest store and buy hundreds of dollars in gift cards, and then scratch off the number and send them. And the request itself seems like, in and of itself, that would just be a red flag. You'd be like, nobody ever asked me for $1,000 in plastic gift cards where I scratch off the back and read the number over the phone. Like, why would I ever do that? What you don't realize is that when you're in this spot, when you're in the ether, these criminals really, they almost have possession of your mind. They just are manipulating everything you do, to the point that you're through, you're checked out, you scratched them off, you called the number, you gave them the numbers, you get back in your car, and then you go, uh-oh, that didn't seem right. And you go back in the store, and a lot of times the money's already gone. So
Right at that
it is,
point.
it's scary how good they are. And that's why we always tell people the gift card is the one thing. It's become one of the most popular ways that scammers ask for money. So we just try to tell people over and over again, that's just the one thing to put in the back of your mind, that anytime anybody asks you to pay an obligation with a gift card, it's a scam, and that's where you walk away. And just hoping that that one fact can be the circuit breaker that helps get somebody back out of the ether and back to that point where they go, wait a minute, I'm hanging up. This doesn't seem legitimate.
Wow, there's just no end of the ways people can deceive you. And I guess they're hard at work finding new ones even today, so that tomorrow we'll be able to tell how many new kinds of scams have taken place.
No, and they never stop. And here's a new one. So another type of imposter scam is a romance scam. So it's where someone is impersonating a romantic interest. A lot of times these things start on Facebook. Sometimes they start on game apps like Words with Friends. But however it happens, you make a new friend online. You connect, maybe they'll move you sort of off the platform, so now you're texting back and forth and sort of establishing that connection. Then what will happen is that this interest, this love interest, or your new friend will say, hey, you know what, like, I've been investing in cryptocurrency and I'm really making a killing, you should try it. So you say, oh, okay, well, here's $100, what would hurt, and all of a sudden your $100 turns into 500. So now you put 500 in, and that becomes 1,000, and you put the 1,000 back in, and that becomes 10,000. And then the imposter says, you know what, you're making so much money, let's move all your investments over here. Like, we'll be millionaires in 2 weeks, and we can cash it all out and go retire. And so then the victim does that, and that's when sort of communication stops. They've put their money in, but they don't have the code or the key to get the money back out. They need to go through this third party or this imposter, who either just cuts off communication completely or says, well, to get your money out, you need to pay the taxes on it. So that's an additional $10,000. The name for this, believe it or not, Rick, is, they call it the pig butchering scam. And it originated in China, and it's actually a literal translation from Chinese. But think about those of us that grew up on the farm. You fatten the pig and you fatten the pig until it's ready to feed the family, and then you butcher it. And that's literally what these criminals are doing. They're catching someone through an imposter scam. They're giving them some money out, but just enough to make them go all in with everything they have. And that's the point that they pull out the knives and do the dirty work.
Sometimes it's really hard to believe what the criminal mind can conceive, but
No, it is. And we hear about this firsthand through our victim support helpline. There's not a week that goes by or lately where we don't hear from somebody that's lost $1 million or more. And the big ticket ones, more and more are becoming these cryptocurrency scams. So you could probably put cryptocurrency up there with gift cards. If somebody asks you for either, it's time to hang up. And I know a lot of people say, like, I don't even understand crypto. I don't want to know anything about it. But here's the thing. In my grocery store, when I leave, there's it looks like an ATM machine, and I can put my debit card in or my credit card in, and I can actually buy crypto and send it to somebody. So these scammers don't even have to say, send me cryptocurrency. They can just say, you need, like, go down to your grocery store and find this ATM. It looks like this. They'll just call it an ATM. You're going to send me, and so they have ways of, even the gift cards, sometimes they call them government bonds. Well, why does my government bond say Amazon on the front of it? But again, they sort of have your mind. So you're not sort of processing everything like you normally would.
Yeah. This is all very, very interesting, and we are so glad that you were able to join us today. That's been an eye-opener for me, and I'm sure for several of our viewers as well. We do have the AARP Fraud Helpline number scrolling across the bottom of the screen. We do encourage anyone who has either been frauded or notices a fraud or becomes aware of a new fraud to report that to this number. It is helpful not only in keeping track of what frauds are taking place, but also in the numbers of frauds that are taking place. And in addition to saying thank you, we would like to thank all of our viewers and welcome you back every third Friday for Fraud Watch Friday. And that's it for this week. Thank you much.
Thanks, Rick.